Right, morning everybody. Thank you for picking this session to attend. We hope we'll be able to share a good and enlightening story with you. My name's Andrew. I'm the Executive Head of Build for Standard Bank for Channels. And with me is Lenra. He's actually our AppDynamics champion in the organization. And there's two of us here because Lenra's had way too much Kool-Aid to be left to tell the truth on his own. So I just have to make sure that we monitor what he has to say. When we were offered the opportunity to present here, we jumped at it because we're on a huge transformation drive in our organization and in Africa. And you can't invent all this stuff yourself. So sharing is an integral part of the way we're trying to work. So for us to come share our story here and learn from you guys is really good. We are a large bank in Africa. We have actually open sourced certain things that we've come across on our journey. We started the Africa DevOps initiative. So a lot of collaboration and putting back into what we're doing and just trying to lift the overall level of IT in the community. And obviously for us, IT is a great place to create opportunities for people in Africa where a lot of people have formerly disadvantaged backgrounds. So it's a good way to get people into the game and get them meaningful careers. So Standard Bank, we operate in 20 countries on the African continent, which brings its own set of complexity. It's a sizable organization, 44,000 staff, in the region of 1,200 branches, 8,800 ATMs, established 154 years ago, so tons of legacy. Luckily, not all the countries are 154 years old, but we have legacy in every country as well, so it's a very complicated environment. And in the region of 15 million customers, so not large in terms of scale, but this is a complex operation due to the geographical distribution. And the organization is very diversified. We've got a corporate banking, we've got insurance, we've got loyalty, retail banking, so it's a diversified financial services organization. So of relevance to us is our strategy, obviously, I think like most banks, is to become digitally enabled. We want to drive a self-service agenda, predominantly on mobile channels, obviously then into internet. We want to digitize business processes right down the organization. And you can actually see, I took this extract out of our annual report. So part of our strategy is to get people out of branches and to enable themselves on our digital channels. So you can see this is actually starting to happen. And the business is very enthusiastic about driving this digital agenda. So then they look to IT to enable it, and that's where things don't go so well. So this information is probably 3.5 years old. You can just see across the board, it's not a very good picture. 30,000 Rand per function point as an estimate. You can see the IT spend, 30% of operating costs. We've got obviously disruptors in the market that we need to be aware of. In South Africa, our unit cost per feature is 3 times our peers, so 3 times any other bank. So not a pretty picture. So obviously business looked to us and said, how do we fix this? So I think 3.5 years ago in the digital channel world, we decided we would fix this through adopting Agile in our channel domain. Needless to say, that didn't end very well. The organization hadn't changed, so we literally on the UI were trying to work in different ways. And we started doing the normal Agile stand-ups and retrospectives. We tried to simplify the requirement documentation and just try to work a bit smarter, but that didn't help us. So what we ended up with was a defect density of about 50%. So out of 10,000 test cases, about 5,000 were failing. We were doing everything manually, so all our testing was manual, our infrastructure provisioning was manual. Any time we wanted to deploy a new app, we had to go and chase the Wares guy and give him our new binary for him to deploy. So it was just across the board an out-and-out failure. So then we had to go back to the drawing board. So Agile clearly wasn't going to be the silver bullet for us. So then we started thinking about how do we make this an engineering problem and tackle it like that. There's obviously a whole bunch of other things we did in the bank, but from where we sort of sit, engineering was a big focus for us. Does anyone know what this building is? No, it's okay. This is building 20 at MIT. It was erected as a temporary structure during World War II because there was a space problem at MIT. And what happened here is because it was a temporary structure, a lot of people started working in here. It was a bit of an overflow space. And you got people from various different disciplines working in this building. So you would have, for example, physicists, linguists, chemistry people, the whole shooting match, everyone working together in this very collaborative environment because they're very open. There were no rules. It was a temporary structure, so if you needed to run in your cable, you could literally kick a hole in the wall, pull the cable through, and off you went. So this building ended up lasting 55 years, and it's estimated that it's, through its history, 20% of the US top physicists worked in this building. 9 Nobel Prize winners worked in this building. Some of the technology that helped the Allies win the war came out of this building. The Bose Sound Corporation came out of this building. So when we looked at how we're going to take engineering forward, we really tried to move management out the way and leave the engineers to solve these problems. We ramped up significantly on the engineering front. I think we went over the last 3.5 years from 12 developers to about 250. And in the bank, we've adopted a SAFE as an organizational construct in IT. And we, in every SAFE program, up to about 120 people, 70% of those need to be engineers. So this is pretty much the journey we went on. This video doesn't work, so unfortunately I'll have to talk through it. But what we found is when we left teams to innovate and solve problems themselves, they did amazing things. So what this video shows when it works is this is actually the IT stack for our internet banking solution. And what happens here is we actually put in an active, passive, it's called blue-green. Don't know if you guys have heard of that. So we had an active pipe, which was running in production, and then we'd have a passive pipe where we'd automatically push all our changes into. And that was the passive pipe. And what could happen there is you'd actually, so we actually went right back to the drawing board. We started provisioning all our service through Chef. So that was all automated, deploying JBoss automated, deploying the app, and then started running tests. And when we were happy with the results, we'd literally do a HA proxy switch, and customers would get new features in production. So instead of 50 people coming in on a weekend, trying to put in a change, probably having to roll it back, not knowing how to roll it back, we got to a situation where we could do real-time production deployments within 20 seconds in the online day, literally by flicking a switch. And if we had to, we could flick back again. Once we were happy that the new active pipe was stable, we would start pushing change back to the other passive pipe. So that's an engineering innovation that came out of leaving these teams to do their thing. The other thing that we did on top of all of this, obviously, was the whole CI/CD pipelines, test-driven development, behavioral-driven development. So tons of stuff that the teams actually came up with themselves, and we found through engineering, we got better and better at what we were doing. What you would have seen in the video then is that that blue-green, those colors would have switched to purple and light blue, and then you're literally live on a new pipe in production. Okay, so our journey started off building one mobile app for South Africa across about 5 different business units. So we had share trading on there, we had insurance, we had loyalty, we had normal banking, all that kind of stuff. And we were literally building a mobile app for South Africa. Eventually, when we did get it live, people quite liked it. So then they said, well, why don't you do the same thing for web? So the idea really was, well, we effectively had to re-architect our stack because we had kind of built a monolith. We found that every time we needed to make a change, it was difficult because you had to release the whole monolith. So we actually re-architected ourselves to support a vertical business domain. And I'll show you now on the app how it looks. But basically, the idea is to enable that feature team to run at their own pace and be in charge of their own destiny. We also saw that we were running duplicate initiatives. So we had a USSD initiative, we had IVR, web, mobile, all doing similar things, all doing inter-account transfers, all doing third-party payments. So we realized that instead of having all these verticals per channel, we needed to really adopt an omni-channel strategy and put down a set of services that supported multiple channels. So we started doing that, and no sooner that started working, where they said, well, why don't you do it for the group? So then you go throw 20 geographies on top of this problem, and again we had to re-architect a fair amount of stuff. But we feel we're in a fairly good position now, and as I said, it's a 3.5-year journey so far, with a long way to go. So just quickly to touch on this, so you can see at the top then, we're actually looking at staff-assisted channels, we're looking at self-service channels, all coming into this common sort of channel management layer with e-commerce and all the banking capability, and then aligning to all the back-end systems of records. And I remember some of those you can multiply by 20. So for example, if you do home loans in all geographies, you actually have to integrate into 20 different countries. And this is at a varying level of maturity, but this, we believe, at last is the sort of target state that we can all align behind in the organization. Okay, so this is a few screenshots of our mobile app. If you look at the left here, you can see a list of countries. So we're literally running one code base, one app. At the moment, across 6 countries. For us to enable additional countries is literally enabling all the backends in the countries. So nice and simple. So we've driven a lot of standardization here. But the idea would be if you clicked on your Botswana dashboard, the app would actually route itself off into Botswana, talk to the Botswana core banking system, bring back all the information you needed to display on the app. And then depending on what products you had in that country, you get different tiles. So if you look over there, and it's all customizable. So you have a normal current account, U-Counts, our loyalty program. This particular dashboard has a credit card. You can see there's an insurance portfolio over there, and then an online share trading portfolio. So I don't know if you can kind of pick up the vision here, but it's basically one app switching between all geographies and showing all the different products you have in those geographies. So you can imagine with this, DevOps becomes really, really important. If we have to release a new feature on a tile that requires a change to the back end, we actually have to be able to push changes out to 20 countries simultaneously. You can only do that if you're doing the whole DevOps journey, if you've got the automation, you've got all the tests in place, etc., etc. So we're quite chuffed now. We have 6 countries live on our mobile app, and we're building a global web solution behind it that reuses all the same services. So it's literally a piece of UI development for us to enable another channel across all these geographies. And then over here you can see the internet version of the mobile app, which we're going to put live in PBI, which is our international operation, in a couple of months' time. Behind all of this now, I think the important part for what we hear about is if you look at that U-Count tile, that's really where the feature team construct comes in. So we'll have a feature team that actually understands loyalty inside out, and they're responsible for the UI as well as the services and the integration into that loyalty product. They'll also create their own infrastructure automatically, and when they provision that infrastructure, they own their whole pipeline into production. Every time we build a server, we put an AppDynamics agent down, we put down integration into Elasticsearch. So I think the important part is that you can almost equate each tile here with a feature team. The mobile app container is almost a platform that we have. And each team that has to build functionality here actually works in a run the bank, change the bank mode. So they do all their own production changes, all their own production support. And you can then see why a tool like AppDynamics becomes so important, that the teams don't waste their time troubleshooting stuff. They can actually performance tune stuff before they put it into production. They can monitor what's happening in their stack, and they're enabled to basically run their entire world. Okay, so that's pretty much the journey we've been on. And Lenra now will actually deep dive into the use cases that we've extracted value from with AppDynamics. Okay.
How's it, guys? Name is Len. I work for Andrew. Just to Andrew's talk about engineering culture. So a big part of what Epidemics has been doing is to tell the engineers that they can think big and there's no problem that you can't solve. So just some context to how we got to AppDynamics. 26 February 2015, our mobile banking app went down, and it was literally down for the whole day. Not sure of how many of you guys know ops spaces, but typically what happens when your app goes down for a whole day is, as a dev, you get invited to a crisis room. When you arrive there, got a lot of people looking at you. And in those days, no devs had access to production, so not sure what they expect from you. Then ultimately is, if there is a tool running in production, then typically your ops people have got access to it, not your developers. And then typically in Standard Bank at least, when there is a tool, it's turned off because it's impacting production. And then you have a lot of people looking and asking, well, what is wrong? Well, that day, it took us 2 hours to finally convince people that we need access to production to start looking at logs. I mean, we were there until around 11 o'clock, and eventually they said, okay, cool, well, what is the last change that was implemented the previous weekend? And then they made a call to say, well, whatever was gone in that weekend, we had to start backing it out. So after backing about 4 separate changes, suddenly production started working again, app was working, but we had no clue around what was actually causing the outage. Next day, we got summoned to our group CIO's office, and she looked at us and asked, well, what the hell happened? We had to be honest, and we had to say, well, we had no clue. I mean, there was a bunch of changes backed out, needless to say, she wasn't really happy. That day I made a statement saying as well, if you keep on treating your devs as second-class citizens, then, I mean, you can't expect us to come in and try and fix your production environments. Well, we left the office, and then I thought to myself as well, we can't leave things as they are. I mean, if you're going to leave it as it are, the same stuff is just going to happen over and over and over. And that put us on a journey where we said, okay, well, we need to do something. So I thought, well, let's have a look at the tools we got in the organization. Can we actually use them? After a struggle for about a week or 2, they gave me access, but then also just limited access. The only way for me then to try and figure out, can this tool do anything useful? I went onto the web, and that's where I started seeing, well, there's alternatives to what we were using. We looked at the bunch of them, AppDynamics being one, Dynatrace being another one, and a couple others. And after trialing a couple of them, we had to convince the right people that we want to buy a tool. So we didn't just go about saying as well, we're just going to get another tool. We had a couple of things that we said we had to satisfy. So key thing was is it always needs to be running in production. No point you have a tool that you have to switch off when it's impacting performance. For me, a key thing was it needs to be easy to deploy and use. Number 3 rule for me is I don't want to call the vendor. So a key thing was is that when we engineers, I don't want to be on the phone all the time to ask somebody, how do I do this, how do I do that? It needed to be a DevOps enabler, so ultimately it needs to be a tool for our devs, it needs to be a tool for our ops people, and we find it's even a great tool for our testers. And then, I mean, we go as far as that's for anybody to use, and it must be an awesome tool to create transparency. And then because we're engineers, we wanted the code drill down capability, and then auto discovery. And in the end, the one tool that, in our opinion, ticked all these boxes was AppDynamics. And today we're running that in the organization. So we're going to run through 3 use cases, or 3 themes at least for you. So ultimately is where we realize a lot of value from AppDynamics. So key thing is so this is prior to we going into production, where we find a massive value from AppDynamics. So we were building an internet banking website for Nigeria, our Nigerian operations. And this project we were going on for quite some time. Eventually, I would say the release was imminent, and we ran into this issue where logins were taking 30 seconds. Now, typically as we had 3 separate layers responsible, so we had our front end with a services layer that then speaks to a middle layer into your core banking system. And we couldn't figure out where the problem was. I mean, we had one developer came to me and said as he spends literally 3 to 4 hours a day first finding the logs. Now you must remember, so we're sitting in South Africa building this front end, and all these things sits in Nigeria. So comms is not great. They speak a funny English, and they're not very forthcoming. And typically it's just everybody saying it wasn't me. So eventually we convinced people, okay, cool, we're going to put on AppDynamics. I got a pilot license from a helpful AppDynamics salesman. And we were live. We had the tool in a day or two later, everything was up and running. And in a day, we could pinpoint exactly where the problem was. In the end, the problem was sitting in the core banking system. We could drill down to a line of code We can provide a line of code. We can say to the provider, well, here's the line of code that's a problem. A week later, they issued us a patch, and the login times went down from 30 seconds to less than 3 seconds. So if it wasn't for AppDynamics in this scenarios, I mean, the guys would have spent probably more weeks, and we would have burned more cash trying to get into production. So ultimately, what this enables is, I mean, it allows our developers to build features instead of hunting logs and then scouring through those logs for where the real problems are. Then another project that is especially a pain in Andrew's life is our USSD project. This is something that kicked off in October 2014. It's not just a technology problem, we had business problems, and this was as we were starting on an engineering journey. Ultimately, as we were finally close to going live, and then we ran into massive performance issues again. The application just couldn't scale. Using AppDynamics in the end, we also got it in. It created visibility to where the transactions are going, which ones were going to our ESB, which one were going straight to a mainframe. And we could do a nice performance test where, as we pushed up the load, so when we went in with this application the first time in production, we couldn't serve 50 concurrent users. Using AppDynamics, we found some code we could improve. And then in the end, we also used AppDynamics during the performance test to understand how the load is going. So we could monitor how, as they pushed up load, so we went from 50 concurrent users up to 500 concurrent users. And as each time they added 50 users, you could see how the CPU utilization went up. And you can see that the response times were staying stable. And that was sufficient for us in the end to convince people we can go back into production. Then ultimately, I mean, AppDynamics also helps you to prevent outages, and it helps you to fix issues in production. This use case, or this incident here, is where we had a core banking implementation in South Africa, and we had to shut down our channels for a period of time. And then as we started up the channels around 3 o'clock in the morning again, AppDynamics started triggering alerts. Now, we're still getting our teams to actually look at some of these alerts, and I think I actually, when I got into the office around 6 o'clock, started setting these alerts, and we had to start investigating why we were getting alerts on a slow response. After digging a bit, we found that one of our clusters, so this was a 4-node cluster serving banking services, and we found that 25% of the calls on this one node was failing. And in essence, what this translated to was that 25% of our customers, each time they logged in, they couldn't get their balances, they couldn't do payments, and those types of things. So using AppDynamics again, so this is just a graph again. We've got your 4 nodes, and then you'll see is that the graph is flat, and then the one node, in essence, was spiking. The other graph just shows where the error rate was low. And in the end, we could identify it was just one node in a cluster that was misbehaving. Its connection pools were blown. So we could take that out of the pool using HA proxy to stop sending traffic to it. And then without really impacting customers, or without our BSM people really noticing that anything was wrong, we could get our service back to normal. And then during quieter times, we could bring the node back into the cluster after we fix the problem. This is a scenario again where it's actually, I was sitting in a meeting with our business service managers, and they got an alert saying is that our internet banking site was down. So at that stage, we were really pushing hard for them to actually use the tool. And then I asked them as well, have you actually looked? And they said no. So I had my laptop with me, opened the laptop. In less than 5 minutes, we can pinpoint exactly where the problem was. It was with an adaptive risk system. And then we could isolate, and we could point to that specific feature team to resolve the issue. That day, the feature team looking after the adaptive risk system couldn't solve the issue. We had feature toggling built into our code base. We could toggle off that specific risk feature, restart the application, and we could return back down to normal services. Now, I mean, from our business service managers, I mean, this was completely strange to them. Typically, if something like that used to happen in the old days, you would be summoned to a crisis room. 2-3 hours it would probably take to find what the problem was. But in this scenario, we could really get just a responsible team to deal with the issue, and service was restored quickly. This is another scenario where we use AppDynamics to prevent outage. So again, AppDynamics triggered an alert. that our transaction logging was starting to deteriorate. There wasn't impacting any customers yet. This is a scenario where, so this is our logging down to our analytics engine, and it was just starting to impact application, but not impacting customer experience yet. Again, with AppDynamics, we could pinpoint exactly where the issue was, where it was when we were writing to queues. In the scenarios, we got, again, the applicable feature team to restart their broker, and the response times return to normal. Last one is ultimately AppDynamics is a true enabler for DevOps. And like I said, it's not just Dev and Ops, it's also our testing community. The clicker stops working. So from our ops community, they suddenly have visibility on errors and exceptions. Our developers have true metrics to how their code is performing. We actually have some people saying as well, they didn't know their code was doing that in production sometimes. We can pinpoint where issues are, and we are actually seeing our guys putting better quality code into production. I mean, so the guys are actively looking at AppDynamics, finding where problems are, and getting them out of the system before we go into production. We've got some interesting use case. As a bank, you won't think it would happen, but we have a scenario, for example, is where certificates expires, and we only notice it when it happens. We've actually implemented a plugin on AppDynamics where we're monitoring our certificates and got health rules. So if you've 60 days prior to expiry, it'll trigger a health alert, and then the teams would start dealing and replacing those certificates. This is just a dashboard we built for, so this is the USD application I was talking about. So this is a dashboard that runs in the Ops Center now. And it just creates some nice visibility, something that just didn't have in the past. In the past, you would be completely blind. Now they've got a good view around what the load is in the system, what the response times looks like. And we've got little dials that'll change colors if there's real issues in the system. Then I guess there's definitely some tips or learnings from our side that we would like to share with you guys. And I guess it ties into the talk this morning where AppDynamics is pushing automation forward. But from our perspective, we try to automate as much as we can. So we're using Chef. So we've got recipes to install all our machine agents. We've got recipes to actually install and configure our controller. Ultimately, is when there's a new version of the agent that is out or a new version of the controller is out, we just update the recipe, we run the recipe, and all this stuff is automated from a upgrade perspective. Then this is something really close to my heart. You need to put AppDynamics in the right hands. What I mean by this is, so if you're an organization like Standard Bank, typically you've got a dedicated tools team that sits on the side, and then they dictate how you have to deploy the agent and how you have to use the agent. I mean, we really so this is really part of the feature team. So ultimately, it's their responsibility to put down the agent. It's their responsibility to configure what they want to see in AppDynamics. And it's been a real help for us. So I guess in our organization, we've got two areas. Andrew's area where we're very focused on the engineering side, and we're seeing real benefits of AppDynamics. And then we've got another area where you still got a tools team that is rolling out AppDynamics on other teams' behalves. And I guess if you speak to Luke or to Nick, you can see as chalk and cheese around how the adoption of AppDynamics has actually helped those various teams in the bank. And then this is something that we've experienced quite, it's touched us quite a lot. You'll see a little Walter White at the bottom. So once AppDynamics goes into the organization, it's a bit like a drug. So I've got Nick, who's my salesman, that is my equivalent of Walter White. Once you have the software, it's like a wave. Everybody wants it. So I guess the only advice from my side is make sure you can manage that demand, because people are going to want the software. So if you're in South Africa, you pay 14 Rand for $1. So AppDynamics is not exactly the cheapest. So make sure you convince the right people that you can buy the software and build the right business cases. I think for us in the end, it was quite easy, is because we could take, for example, as where it's helped us to deploy software quicker. So that translates to cost savings. And the fact that, so in the past we used to go to our regulator a lot because we had a lot of downtime on our systems. With AppDynamics in the bank, that has actually brought that down a lot. I mean, and that in itself translates to a cost saving. So I guess that's the story of Standard Bank, how we're using AppDynamics. I mean, it's been a really awesome tool for us. And that's how far our story goes. Any questions?
Just a second so people can hear you.
Hi, you mentioned a plugin for your certificates and monitoring. Is that one of the standard ones from the developer site? Or
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, it uses the machine agent.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's really easy to configure.
Which one is it? Sorry.
I can't remember exactly which one it is. I mean, I mean, it's on a marketplace.
Yeah, it's just if it's like I don't know, a log one or So I'll check with you later.
Okay, cool, perfect,
Okay.
no problem.
If you go to the AppDynamics exchange, you can find that extension. It plugs into Machine Agent, hits a URL, and will give you the notifications there. You'll also see some of the things that we built tomorrow in the keynote that came from our hackathon. One of the pieces someone built was actually doing network packet analysis to do the same thing. It's kind of a cool use case, but question in the front here.
So you mentioned about the CI/CD pipeline and how you guys enabled that and that facilitated you to be more agile and deliver things faster. How did the tool provide you? Can you go a little bit more in depth and explain how was the developer's culture adapting with the tool? How did the tool facilitate you to sort of put it in the build and deploy environment? Was there a lot of manual work needed to do that? You mentioned a little bit about the chef recipes that you guys used. So a little bit more elaboration on that.
Yeah, so, I mean, we've got chef recipes for JBoss. So because we run JBoss for application service, whenever a team would deploy an application, so firstly with Chef, the infrastructure is automated, and then the JBoss installation is also automated. So the teams doesn't really have a choice. You get so we've included the AppDynamics agent deployment as part of the recipe. So as you spool up your JBoss in dev, in SRT, in production, the agent is there by default. So I guess the only thing there is just the management around licensing. So that was manual. So because it's there, I mean, ultimately, as the teams know, they can go to AppDynamics and they can see how the transactions are flowing through the application. So whenever they commit code and the people start testing, so we got a whole bunch of automated tests, you can see those results. I mean, so I guess, it's only recently that we really started focusing with AppDynamics to look at performance. So I mean, we're only using APM at the moment. We're not using any of the other components yet. But I mean, if you just look at the exceptions and errors, the visibility that is created. I mean, so a lot of the guys, looking through the logs, you're always going to miss stuff. Where AppDynamics just makes it super simple. We can go and see how frequently an exception is occurring, how frequently an error is occurring. And by the guys just looking at those things as the test runs, they've actually managed to up the quality of the code, and we're managing to get software into production quicker, and there's less errors in production. We do. So we got production, non-production controller. I guess the biggest problem we've got is in that hopefully AppDynamics is solving now with the stuff they announced. It's just managing, because teams can spool up as many nodes as they want, and before you wipe out your eyes, all your agents are gone.
Other questions?
I had a question about the blue-green concept that you had, that you mentioned earlier. When you're pushing to I guess the blue one's the offline
Well,
one,
it
right?
varies. Either one is
Either
active.
one, I guess they change. So when you're pushing to one that's not active right now, do you redirect traffic to both of them at the same time?
No, so what we'd have is an HA proxy that would just route to whichever one's active. Yeah.
So
Ultimately, it routes on port. So you can get both of them at the same time. It's just the one will just be in a different port. So typically what we do is the passive environment, we deploy to it continuously. So the business can then test and validate in a production environment. So you can only go to that port if you're on the bank's internal network. So then they can validate that they're happy what they're seeing is, and then when we're ready to switch, in essence, it's a click of a button, and then we redirect the traffic on the HA proxy to just a different port.
So we can almost run a small beta against that stack,
Right.
and when we're happy, we just switch our production traffic.
And how does that get reflected in AppDynamics when you have both running? If you're hitting the one that's offline, for lack of a better word, does it get reflected in AppDynamics as well at the same time, and you get traffic from both kind of overlapping?
Yeah, so we got 2 tiers in essence. So we got our blue tier and our green tier. So you can see the traffic originating in the blue tier and the green tier. So if you want to drill down specific, so because it's in a different tier, you can just go to that specific tier and see how the transactions are flowing through that specific tier.
I think we have time for maybe one more.
You talked about adoption by your devs, right? And the fact that you have agents automatically deployed is a good first step. But I guess, outside of the stuff that you get out of the box, right, with the exceptions and the errors, a lot of the power of the tool is in some of the diagnostics and tuning your business transactions, things like that. So how did you get your devs to sort of train up to get to that point where they're doing that sort of deep diving and really sort of gaining the power from the tool?
Well, we're not perfect in that yet. I mean, I've got personal interest in AppDynamics, and I spend quite a lot of time in it. And I take, for example, the USSD project. I mean, I spend a lot of time myself. So, I mean, the teams are still, I guess that is the difficult part around defining those business transactions. I mean, and it's something we struggle with as well. But you do find people that actually takes the time, once they see the benefits of identifying specific business transactions that they're interested in. But it's certainly something that we're still on the journey to try and get the teams to define those business transactions. I guess the biggest thing that we find is that people leave it. And then by default, AppDynamics, as soon as you go over 50 business transactions, it starts gobbling them up into a group. And then it's a little bit late. So it's something that we're working with the team still. But I mean, there's pockets definitely in our teams that has started to specifically focus on business transactions and define them using custom match rules. And then we start seeing real benefit.
I also think with the build it, run it concept, people are incentivized to put better stuff into production, so they'll use whatever tools you have.
Maybe we could do one more. We have about a minute.
I think you were mentioning that your business folks were, testing whichever environment wasn't live and that kind of thing. And you also were mentioning that some folks dive into the application, some folks don't, And so I think one of the struggles of our IT department is partnering not only with the partners, like your business partners, but also with the devs, with operations, with your engineers. And so we see some people use the application all the time and others don't. And it's usually the ones that don't come screaming, "Oh, help us real quick." And, we're going 2 weeks before, live, and we're seeing this problem, and, somebody hadn't configured storage management in Azure correctly, and that's the reason why the application was performing very slowly, and it took us 2 minutes to find it, whereas they had a whole team working on it for 3 months. And so what's the challenges for your group as far as evangelizing AppDynamics across your organization and some of those pain points there? We're finding that in our organization, so sounds like you're a little bit ahead of us.
Well, I guess everybody, what we struggle with is you get continuously whipped by business to deliver features. So your teams are focusing on just writing new features and not spending enough time to looking at AppDynamics to go and bed the things down. But when the people start seeing the benefit, I mentioned earlier about transparency, and you'll be surprised that, we've used it to show to other teams that they've got problems in their code. It's quite interesting is when they also start looking at AppDynamics and telling you where your problems are in your code. So, it's like I say, it's an awesome tool just people can't hide stuff anymore. So, and as soon as people start seeing that value, and our testers, so we did a BVA with AppDynamics where they spoke to the testers. Our testers spend 60% of their time not to test, but to try and pinpoint where the problem is. So now with AppDynamics in the environment are people like testing on our internet banking platform. I mean, it takes them minutes, so they can spend more time testing than trying to troubleshoot what the problems are. I mean, I take that USD scenario I was using, and Andrew will kick me for that, I mean, the thing ran for 2 years, and then eventually he asked us, well, why is there no AppDynamics configured on this application? And it's just because we were running around like blue-ass flies, trying to implement functionality. And once we implemented it, it actually allowed us to pinpoint where the problems are, fix it, and finally get into production. So
just a general comment on adoption. If you run stuff in a project mentality, you're going to do whatever you have to do to get it across the line, and then that's someone else's problem, okay? If you organize yourselves like we're busy doing now around sustainable feature teams that own something in the long term, you're incentivized to work in a more smart way using better practices, okay? Because you want something sustainable that you can push a lot of change through. And I think as soon as the people in that feature team realize that they own the system, they own the cost of the system, the support of the system, the ability to evolve the system, then they work in a much more sustainable manner. And that's where, I mean, we've had the same problems with TDD. Senior developers are not interested. Until they realize that without it, they actually can't release features reliably and quickly. And then you can't take away all the manual governance at the end of the process. But once they realize that if you've got all that stuff in place, you can actually push change almost continuously, and the performance of the team is measured like that, then adoption becomes a lot easier. But it's difficult. I mean, your point's very, very valid. It's hard. And sometimes we use a big stick and other times a carrot. But, you know, generally over time, people see the benefit of the stuff and then they start buying in. And then you get that critical mass that actually help drive the message forward.